I am Joe Pronesti. I'm with City of Elyria, Ohio Fire, Northern Ohio in Lorain County. I've been on, I started my 32nd year in the beginning of July this year. And I do some writing for fire engineering on a couple UL advisory boards. And basically just love sharing all my mistakes and past events and my experience. Tonight, we're going to look at, and Jordan kind of mentioned it. He said, you know, we got two of these buildings, but all around him in their department is these type 3s. And everybody listening, and everybody watching this, I should say, and listening, you are going to, your department will be, it'll make or break it when you have your downtown fire. And I have this slide on here, and I have that chief whose face is blacked out. You can have a house fire. We all have house fires, our bread and butter house fire. And, you know, they affect a family, or, you know, in case of an apartment, they're very small circle of what they affect, good, bad, or indifferent. When you go to a house fire or an apartment fire, it's a very small group of people that it has affected. When you burn a building downtown, all eyes are on you. And they happen every day. And it's a different type of tactic, a different type of mindset that you have to have. Because again, when you have a fire in your main street or in your downtown and you burn a block down, you may forgive burning out the florist in the middle of your downtown. But if you lose your florist, the shoe store next door, the mom and pop hardware store next to that, the bar next to that, a lot of that is tactics. And then the town, all eyes are on you. The town wants to know why. There's a good example.
The heart of downtown Grafton went up in flames Monday morning, leaving many paralyzed in disbelief.
Can't stop watching it. It's very sad.
One fire destroyed 2 buildings village officials say were at least 140 years old. One neighbor described hearing an explosion that ultimately displaced an estimated half a dozen families.
8:45, I left to take my other son to school, and I was only gone for like 9 minutes because it's right down the street, and I came back and the entire place was caught on fire next door.
Village officials say the fire started at a former restaurant, then quickly spread to the town favorite, Lou's Pizza.
This was a fire that we responded to in mutual aid in a village or that is southeast of us called Grafton, Ohio. Grafton has a population now. There's 2 prisons in Grafton and 2 big prisons, so I guess they kind of throw the inmates in as the population. But bottom line is, it's a small town. It's a 1-street town, Main Street, and they lost 2 buildings there, and it totally disrupted the entire town. Now, I'm not getting into, you know, again, you learn from events, but if the first engine arrived with only 2 or 3 people, and it ended up spreading to an apartment building next door. The building on the Delta exposure was sprinklered in the basement area. But the bottom line was this was devastating to the town, and that's what's going to happen here. I like to call this Main Street optics. What do you see? We're going to go over some common things that are missed because we go to bread and butter fires, residential dwellings, day in and day out. So what is a type 3? Basically, we call it ordinary construction. It's a lumber yard within 4 brick walls. We'll talk a little bit about how to identify what is truly type 3 and what might be wood frame type 5 with just a brick facade. But this is your main street, your downtown building. The exterior walls are non-combustible or limited combustible, and in interior walls, everything else is wood. and the floors are wood, the rafters are wood, and fires in these buildings. The biggest thing, if you don't remember anything else tonight, I want you to always think about being able to forecast ahead of the fire. It is paramount that you think where the fire will be in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, because that's where cities fail, fire chiefs fail, command officers fail, and that's when we start burning down blocks of these buildings. Once again, I have this in every slide presentation I do. 3 books that you need to have. Brannigan's Building Construction for the Fire Service, the 6th edition is now out. Collapse of Burning Buildings by Vinnie Dunn, and The Firefighter's Battle Space by Vinnie Dunn. 3 excellent books that everyone watching this needs to have. Brannigan's Building Construction, this 6th edition, I may have mentioned this in my previous webinar with you guys, but if you didn't see that one, you're new to this one. The 6th edition is broken down by sections. You get yourself some sticky notes and you find out what you have in your town from this book, and you just put those sticky notes in those sections and you read those sections. If you don't have type 4 heavy timber, then don't read it in Brannigan's Building Construction. Focus on what you have, but this book breaks it down so you can easily go back and back and back and review and read. So these 3 books are a must, and they're a must if you want to understand the type 3 ordinary constructed building. Perfect example here. This is a cutout in my town of a building they were tearing down in my downtown. This is a perfect example of the bricks. We'll talk a little bit more about how they are laid out, but this is just I thought was a good picture of what we would call the width. That is the rows of bricks that make up these buildings. Big thing to remember. We are looking at buildings that are 100, 130, 120 years old. They are, and we joke, but it's true. The only thing that's holding up these buildings is gravity. You know, these buildings are 100 years old, but their wood is very substantial because of the lumber that was utilized in these buildings. If you are from a town that protects, and you know, if you're tuned in and you don't have any type 3, hey, great. And like we talked earlier, but you would respond mutual aid to those kind. But if you protect a rich suburb that is nothing but type 2 buildings, you protect cheap throwaway crap buildings. And that's just the way it is. These buildings that we're going into, so my point is that in a type 2 or a wood frame building, type 5 with trusses and modern furnished materials, they're going to collapse. Your fire ground commanders and firefighters and officers, you pretty much go into that mindset that if we can't lick this thing in the first couple minutes and it's a one-line fire, if it gets beyond that, we're backing out, we're throwing big streams, and the thing collapses. These older buildings give you time before they start to moan and groan and collapse. We'll definitely talk about that in safety, but these are the buildings, because of that growth, new growth and old growth, that keeps us inside, the old growth, I should say. Here you see 2018, this is a piece of lumber from 2018. It's made in a petri dish. It's not in a tree that has been sitting in a forest or milled that's 100, 120 years old. So its strength is going to be tremendous compared to new growth. You have to understand that. You have to understand the skeletons that you're going into. It will allow you to work. It will allow you to lay lines and fight fire, what we all want to do. These fires, you know, if you get in on these are the ones that you all dream of multiple mass or cylinders. You're working hard, smoke. It's what we all signed up for. But if you don't do it correctly and it gets away from you, then that's, like I said, you got trouble. We're going to focus on a red circle. If you look at this timeline, you know, if you got into the fire service in the 2000s. You know, this is our modern type of construction. Again, throwaway buildings. They're going to come down, they're going to scrape them up, throw them to the dumpster, and build a new one. Your downtown buildings, those 100-year-old, 120-year-old buildings, they're going to have, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about the mortar that's holding them up, how the rafters are laid into the walls, overall construction. But this is what we're focusing on. So the exterior optics of these type 3 buildings. We're going to talk about 5. There are many things, but I'm going to review, and you know, if it's something new, great. Any of these things that you haven't seen or heard of, share it with your other firefighters, because these are all things that are going to, again, make or break your success on your main street. But we're going to talk about these exterior optics. The year built, block inscription, that tells you a lot. If Bill Smith builds a Wendy's in your town, and he builds it in 2020, Bill Smith isn't going to put in that Wendy's Smith 2020. What a lot of these builders did, these architects and these contractors, or the people that own the buildings that built these buildings 100, 120 years ago, at the top of the parapet wall or somewhere on the building, a lot of these buildings, they would put the year it was built. That will tell you a lot about what might be holding up that building, and we'll get into that. There's one year you need to remember that will really lead you on your way to understand what's holding that up. And again, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about the King's Row and the header rows, how to tell if it's a true masonry building or if it's wood frame with a brick facade. The parapet wall. We'll talk about canopies, awnings, and signs, and fire escapes. You have to remember that before, you know, now, if you wanted today to go build something in your house or fix something in your house, whatever, you go to a big box store. 90, 80 years ago, 100 years ago, you would go to the hardware store that was in your downtown. That was the mecca of your city, was the downtown. And that's where you would go and get everything. Well, since that was your main street, you would have signs and canopies and awnings that would hang on these. Think about when you go to Walmart. There's no big giant Walmart sign hanging on the roof or hanging off the side of the building. Yes, it says Walmart, but it's not like what you would see in these buildings that were built 100 years ago. Those things add weight, and we'll talk about that, and they matter. And if you're not used to them being there and you're not used to the hazard, they can reach out and bite you. And we'll talk about fire escapes. You're not going to have fire escapes at your big box stores. You're not going to have fire escapes at your garden apartments that you protect, your townhomes that you protect that were built 20 years ago. You're going to have fire escapes on these buildings, and we'll get into that. Right there. If you zone out, if you disconnect me, if I bore you, all I want you to remember is one year, 1933. 1933. And you can take everything from that date, either back or forward. But here's the thing. In 1933, there was an earthquake in California. And long story short, the damage that was caused from that earthquake in 1933 changed how some buildings were built, or how the buildings, as far as rules and how rafters are hung, masonry, all that, which we will get into. Buildings after they reinforced some things. They used maybe a little bit more rebar. We'll talk about that as we move forward in the next slides. But 1933. So again, here in my downtown, this person built this building, and he built it in 1906. very simply, I just know now this building was built in 1906. I know because it's previous to 33, what is possibly holding this building up, and in turn, the hazards that those construction materials will have when there's a fire. 1933. If the years aren't on your buildings downtown or on these buildings, it's very simple. You can figure out when they were built and go from there. The biggest one of the changes, when the earthquake occurred, the bonding material in the bricks and the mortar, again, we're talking a type 3 building. So when they would lay the course of bricks and they would utilize the mortar, they used sand lime mortar prior to that earthquake. And one of the things with sand lime was if over time, the water, wind, rain, the elements, it's just not as strong a bonding adhesive as the Portland cement. So this earthquake went through in 33 and it did all this damage. Well, one of the things they found was, you know, the cement holding the masonry was the mortar wasn't good enough. So they, out of that, they came away with a little bit better cement, a bonding agent for the mortar. Here's a good example of a building in my town that we threw an aerial up, threw a bucket up, and this is building was built in the late 1800s. Now, don't tell anybody in my town that an assistant chief's going up in a bucket and peeling away mortar. But what do you think if I can do that with my hand, what your streams will do? And so, again, 1933, that's the key. This building, again, was built that I'm doing this late 1800s, sand lime mortar. You're able to pick that clean, the mortar between the bricks. Prior to 1933, also, the rafters, fire cut beams. As you can see, these are called lets, and they're just basically a pocket. So when he built these buildings, they would put the rafters on an angle in these. And this was, fire cut beams are designed to release the building inward in the event of a fire. So fire cut beams were designed to allow if you were to have a fire, that the building, as you think of the A, B, C, and D, that if you had a fire with these fire cut beams, the bearing walls for most of your downtown type buildings are going to be Bravo and Delta. And these fire cut beams allowed, prior to 33, that when they would have a conflagration or a fire, that these fire cut beams would release and everything would go inward, collapse inward. So it saved the walls. So then basically all they had to do was scrape up the innards and rebuild. And they still had the 4 walls. And so, you know, if a building's built before 33, those fire cut beams aren't going away. Again, this was a building that was taken down in my downtown earlier this year. And we got in there and we were able to look at some of the lets and the fire cut beams as they were taking it apart. But it just shows you, again, to understand the anatomy of these buildings. Now, I'm not saying that you can predict totally how a building will collapse. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what this is about at all. But you'll have a good idea based on the year it went up. You'll have some idea on how it could collapse, and just something to think about. The King's Row or Header Row. So I challenge you, when you get a new firefighter, some of you watching this may already know this, that's great. But I challenge you, and I challenge you to leave your department better than what you found it. When you have a new firefighter, you know, this 21-year-old kid, it's a firefighter, just comes on a job, or if you're a young member of the department watching this, I applaud you, but you're trying to learn. Firefighters just don't come on your job and know everything. you have to take them to these buildings and explain and tell them what exactly, is this a true brick masonry building, or is this a wood frame building with a brick facade? And you can identify these quickly by the King's row or what's called the header row. So when you look at a building, you'll notice that maybe every 6 or 7 rows of brick, you'll see a course turned. And what that does is, in this cutaway, it's turned and it brings the mortar together. It brings the rows or the widths of the bricks together. Remember, these buildings were not built with any kind of rebar. Prior to 1933, there wasn't much rebar used to add that support of the brick. You know, they're not using this type of brick to build an O'Reilly's auto parts store in your town. They're using block, and they're using probably some rebar and those things. A concrete masonry unit or block, CMU. But they didn't have that then. So in order to get the building's walls to adhere, they would have to turn. So when you see a row turned, that's a very good indication that it's a true type 3 and it's ordinary construction. And you're not going to have a wood wall behind this with just a single row of brick. Just something to think about. Now, some people say, well, in my town, they're building a building and they're making a header. Okay, great. If you're watching them build a building in 2020 and you see that, it's fake, okay? It's fake. But if you go to your downtown to a group of buildings built 100, 120 years ago and you see that, that ain't fake. That it's an unreinforced masonry wall, and it's tied in like that, and it's true type 3. Here's another one in my downtown. There's no header course. So what basically this was this building was built in the late 1870s, I believe, 1880s, and it was just a wood frame building. And they just threw up some brick. Well, okay, so why is that important? Well, if it collapses, we may have just like a curtain fall collapse, type of curtain wall collapse where it's like you cut a curtain and it just kind of falls to the ground. Again, we can't predict how a wall will come down totally, but you should have a good idea. So if you don't have any courses turned, it's a brick facade over a wood frame building. Plus, as things freeze and thaw here over the year, as things freeze and thaw, these will expand out, and you can have problems that way too. Not only in these type of buildings, but also in your true type 3, especially up in our area. My town has a street that is totally blocked off, an alley, because the bricks are falling, not because I went up in an aerial and pulled the mortar off, but the bricks are falling into the alley from a almost 200-year-old, well, I shouldn't say 200, 1890 building that the bricks are starting to fall off. We'll talk here. Keep this in mind. Here's something that I'll talk to you about more, but here's the other thing. I hope all of you are watching me not sweating your butts off. And that's because you are in air conditioning. When these buildings were built, there's no air conditioning, okay? There was no real HVAC. Everything was convected heat from boilers, no HVAC. If you look at a fluorescent light in your fire station or in your house or wherever, fluorescent lighting really didn't come into play until after World War II. So all they had was incandescent light, normal light bulb. When they built these buildings, they needed as much light and as much air as they possibly could. And so they made these windows and these ceilings up to 12 feet. So you had all this room between floors. That is why when you were in fire school, they always said, well, a good way to judge a commercial building is, 12 feet per story or whatever. Well, a lot of that has to do with the old way of when they built these, that they didn't have the fancy HVAC, that you needed lots of light and you needed lots of air. And so, and insulation. So you would have these high ceilings. Well, you can see in this building in my town that this means when you see this, when they replace these windows, they sure as hell aren't going to make 12-foot high windows. They lower the windows to what you would probably put in a house, also lowering the ceiling. This is all void, and we'll get into that. So when you see in your downtown that you got a normal looking window, and then you got all this space above, that's a void. And you got to heed that. And that's how we burn these things down, by not knowing that, not understanding that. Another good telltale sign of these types of buildings is what's called the lintel. You got a window here, and you got to hold up the brick above the window. So they would put a piece of metal across here to support that brick. Fire comes blowing out of these windows. It's heating up that metal. And we all know that that metal is going to turn and twist and elongate. There's nothing else holding up these bricks above. So when you have heavy fire conditions blowing out a window in these buildings for a long period of time, always remember that you probably have a metal lintel above that, again, is going to twist and turn and could bring down those bricks there. Just something else to think about in your downtown. The parapet wall. What is it hiding? Here's another thing about the parapet wall. Prior to 1933, before that earthquake, you could build a parapet as high as you wanted. It didn't matter. It's a good example. This building was built in my downtown late 1800s, and this parapet wall, it's kind of hard to see, it's ginormous. It goes as high, you can make it as high as you want it. After 33, there was some parameters put on the height of the wall. So if you have real high parapet walls, you could pretty much guess that that's a pre-1933 building. Another thing that comes with these is that if they don't put any kind of coating, wainscoting or coverage to protect these bricks, wind, rain, freezing temperatures, freezing thawing periods, they're gonna, there's nothing protecting these bricks. If they don't do that parapet wall, so this was a good example that I had taken one of my firemen up on one of my downtown buildings. And here you have this protected. That's great. But where it's not protected, he's able to pull that brick right on out of that parapet. So I encourage you, if you are a part-time department or even a paid department, one of the biggest things that I absolutely dread, I hate, is, okay, it's check day. It's check day on our aerial. So what do? You put the damn thing on the front ramp, it goes up in the air, goes back down in the cradle, you back it in, and you're done. You got to stop doing that. Utilize your aerial and check day to go out and look at your buildings. Go out on a Saturday or Sunday. You know, my downtown is a ghost town, okay? I got most of these buildings in my downtown, a lot of them are vacant or being rehabbed. So on a, during the week, we can probably get away with putting our aerial up, and we do. But if you don't do that, maybe ask your chief on the weekends, or if you're a part-time department on a drill night or drill weekend, to get up and take a look at your downtown buildings. And you get two things: spotting practice of your apparatus, and you get to look at things like your parapet walls and what's behind them. Here, well, we all know what that is. And if you don't, I'll tell you, it's called a bowstring truss. This is an auto body shop in my downtown. And that parapet wall, which would be on the D side, here's the C side, again, is hiding this. If I have new firefighters, you have new firefighters that don't know the town, don't know what's going on, all they see is this wall. They don't know that this is a wood bowstring truss roof that you can walk in between the trusses from one bow to the next, to the next. And if you're unfamiliar, you want more info, I want you all to write this down on your phones that you're watching. 1978, we're coming up on the anniversary. August 3rd, wall bums, New York City. I'm not a good speller. Wall bums, supermarket. Killed 6 firefighters. Bowstring truss, another thing called a rain roof, which we'll talk about. But if you're unfamiliar, 1978, wall bums fire, New York City. It's an event that we should all know about and know the lessons. Parapet wall collapse. Guys and gals listening to this, watching this, brothers and sisters, I can't overemphasize when I study these fires, and again, I study them all over the country. One of the things is because we do bread and butter house fires, that we're not used to parapet walls and their collapse. The parapet wall is the most unstable wall of these buildings. And a parapet wall is the wall that just extends out above the roof line, if you would, on either the front or back or all 4 sides. It's exposed on the back side, but these buildings will all have some sort of parapet wall. And again, based on that 1933, you'll know how high or how low they are. And they can collapse very quickly, and we'll talk about how they collapse here in a second. If you're underneath that, you're gonna get hurt. Most parapets, just like that lintel above a window, you're gonna have an I-beam. It's going to support the parapet. We all know when that metal heats, it expands. If you have heavy fire conditions, this is going to heat up and expand, and it's going to bring down the parapet wall. Plus, again, if this backside is unprotected, there's no wainscoting, no covering, no protective covering, and you just have masonry brick, over time, freezing and thawing, this is going to expand. If it's built before 1933, you're going to have that sand lime mortar, and this will be the first thing that's coming down on top of your head. Here's a fire. This was a fire that took place last year or earlier this year in Indianapolis.
Do you need the water pressure bump?
1 story. Now again, this was a perfect example. That heat, it just twists that, and that parapet's coming down. See if I can get that in slow motion. Another good example. Now, if you have, and this is why I use this, this was a fire that took place in Massachusetts, Fall River. We have a 1-story building, and you have this facade and this parapet wall. When you have a 1-story, you will for sure have some sort of I-beam that's going to run this way to hold this up. You have these showroom windows that have heavy fire conditions or any kind of fire in any kind of void space above in the drops, above the drop ceiling. It's going to heat up and it's going to come down, which is what happened here. This is that building.
Let's get right to the video. Flint Hardware collapsing just a few minutes ago. Fortunately, all the firefighters had already evacuated at that point. They had left the building because it was unsafe to be inside, and sure enough, it did.
Makes a difference in how we spot our apparatus, how we put our people. And again, we go to house fires day in and day out. Rare, I say rare, and then I say they're happening all over. These buildings, these fires are happening everywhere, okay? But if they haven't happened in your town and you have this block of buildings, I guarantee you that for every downtown building fire you've had, you probably had 10 to 20 residential fires. And it's a totally different mindset, totally different attack, apparatus spotting, command and control, safety, everything. And if you try to bring those kind of thoughts to the downtown building, you're going to probably lose the block or you could get people killed.
Let's get right.
Canopies, awnings, and signs. Again, these buildings were very elaborate, okay? In my downtown, we had a Sears, all right? Well, that sign, you're not going to find that on your Walmart. Basically, they're just into the wall a little bit here with some metal, and it heats up, it's going to pull right on out. This is a downtown building. This sign actually went to some museum in my downtown because it was so elaborate. But that's a lot of weight. If you have a canopy or a movie theater, this canopy here is going to fill with water. So if you're throwing streams and lots of water, that thing's just going to fill up. That's just one big opening to fill up. That it'll just come right on down. You're not going to find these, again, on the modern building. So you have to understand their hazards when you look at your type 3 ordinary constructed buildings. This is in downtown Cleveland, Ohio. A lot of downtowns want to try to revitalize their buildings like downtown Cleveland did. So we got some cool signs up here, and then somebody thought it's really cool to string some lights. Okay, well, what's that going to do for your aerial? All right, what do you think? You know, I don't know. We have these over one block in my downtown, and they told us that if you just put the aerial up in the air, these will snap away, and they're like Christmas lights. Okay, all right, that's fine. But what do you think? You know, how's that going to handle your spotting, your apparatus spotting if they're everywhere? These walls have to have some sort of cap, some kind of top. If you were to, again, build the downtown, a O'Reilly's Auto Parts or a new Family Dollar that's going up in your downtown or in your town, they don't have to worry about any kind of covering at the top of the wall. With this masonry, they needed some sort of covering. They needed some sort of coping stone or cap over top. This is kind of cool and why you need to get out in your downtown. This person who built this building in my downtown put the year it was built up here on this coping stone. So we would have never seen that if we hadn't gone up on top. We'll talk about a little bit more on recon. But anyway, there's nothing holding these on but gravity. There's nothing holding this on but gravity. That's just a cap. You start throwing some water, those are blowing off. You could probably go up on here and pull these off. More hazards. Cornices. That is nothing but hollow wood in a lot of buildings. They're very elaborate, but all it is one more area for fire travel. How do you know? Well, you got to get up and look at them. Again, not much holding these on. You can see this building is built 1895. Another shot of one of my buildings. You can see the deterioration. Actually, this is the alley that they blocked off below this, but you can see a lot of the masonry and mortar has been washed away and away from this cornice. Another shot of a cornice just showing how hollow these are. Nothing holding them up. A lot of fire travel, and that can just peel off on top of your head. Fire escapes. The people living in this, in my town, wish this was cannabis and not ivy. But fire escapes are one of the last things that a landlord will fix. They cost a lot of money. State of Ohio and probably most states, if you can't take the fire escape off. If you take a fire escape off, you got to put one on. So these are expensive, and they're one of the last things that a landlord will fix. Well, you need to get out and look at these, because if they're not fixing them, are you going to trust your people on them? The people who live in these apartments on these floors in this back alley here, this building in my town, you know, okay, I'm sure if there's a fire, they're going to trust. But I don't know if I would trust my people going up and down those fire escapes. So you need to look at your fire escapes in your downtown area. These buildings, type 3 ordinary constructed buildings, are going to have fire escapes on the back of them if they've had any kind of residential, if they were built with that intent. A good example of a failure of one. This picture won a, I don't know if it's a Pulitzer or whatever in the photography world of newspapers. But in 1975, you can see this firefighter, they put the aerial up. He has mom, and mom has the child. This collapsed, and he was able to grab onto the aerial, but the mother passed away, and the child survived because she fell on top of her mother. But just a tragedy, but a good example of fire escapes and their failure. All right, we're going to go inside now. What do you have above? Do you have a bar? Do you have single room occupancies? The fire, if anybody here is from Lima Fire, the fire that you had in your downtown month or so ago or whatever, I understand that there was some homeless or worried about homeless people living in there. I want to talk about that fire a little bit later, but what do you have? I got some single room occupancies, junk, collection of just stuff, a bar. What do you have in your downtown buildings now? I guarantee you when these were built for, again, your hardware stores, your florist shops, everything. And over time, you know, it wasn't made when it was built to be maybe a florist on the first floor with maybe a dentist or lawyer's offices above. Well, now it's a dollar store full of plastics on the first floor, and the second and third floors are vacant. You have to identify what you have. You have to get into these buildings yearly. You're going to be able to stretch more than one line here. This is, in my town, a wig store. And this is going from the A to the C down a narrow corridor. Forget it. Forget it. What do you have in your main street? The hierarchy. You have to understand, if you're a paramedic watching this, you have to understand, I use this analogy all the time. If somebody goes up to a person with a 45 and pulls the trigger, to the head, there isn't much that you're going to be able to do for that person. You have to understand when your building is shot in the head. And Alan Bernasini said that many moons ago, or a chief that has since passed away of Phoenix, Arizona. But you have to understand when the building's shot in the head. To understand that, you have to understand how these buildings are supported. You could have a column, girders, the joists rest on the girders, and then the floor. The worst thing you can do is to lose a column. You lose a column, everything else is coming down. So a hole in the floor isn't going to be that bad. You lose a column, everything else, that's the worst thing you could do. You're cutting the legs out from underneath that building. So you have to understand when you go through these, take a look at the columns. Are they protected? What makes them up? Those kind of things mean a lot when there's a fire. He explains it pretty well here.
Hello, my name is Paul Dansbach, and welcome to Fire Engineering's Training Minutes. In this session of Training Minutes, we're going to talk about collapse resistiveness of certain floor systems. We're also going to talk about structural hierarchy. Understanding structural hierarchy will help us identify which structural components are more important than others. In terms of structural hierarchy, building columns are some of the most important structural components of the building. This column runs vertically. It runs from the footing or foundation. It runs up. It supports, in this case, a steel beam. The steel beam, in turn, runs horizontally and supports the floor joists on the top of the steel beam. Back to our column. If our column were to fail, it would result in the loss of support to the beam. The beam may also fail, dropping the floor joists which are supported by the beam, resulting in a large area of collapse. Additionally, if this column line runs vertically through the building and supports subsequent floors and the roof, the loss of a column in a basement level or the lower level of a building will result in a vertical collapse sequence vertically through the building to the floors above and to the roof, resulting in not only a large horizontal collapse zone, but a collapse zone that encompasses all floors of the building above the column which has failed. The building that we're in is an old supermarket. The portion of the building that we're standing in was constructed in the 1970s. You will notice the floor joists of this building are of large dimensional lumber. They're actually 3x12 floor joists. Additionally, the 3x12 floor joists have been constructed in a manner designed to support a heavy load above. The floor joists are 12 inches on center as compared to the normal framing standard of 16 inches on center. What that does is allows for a greater load. What that means for the fire service is that there is more meat in the floor joist. That translates to a greater burn time. The fact that the joists are 12 inches on center builds redundancy into the floor system. In this case, we could have a localized area of collapse or damage to several of the joists, but because the joists are redundant, one will help take up the load of the adjoining joists should they fail. Another collapse potential in this building is burn through of the floor decking. What we see when we look up between.
So he talks about columns. They're going to be stacked. They're a primary structural member. How are they protected in your buildings? A lot of times these may be boxed in. If they are, that's great. It also creates, though, a channel for fire, another void. But you need to see how your columns are. Good example of different types of columns. How do they react in compression, their strength as far as buckling and shear. One of the things that we'll talk about, this kind of slide is kind of out of sequence and I apologize, but cast iron. Cast iron was very popular after the Civil War until the early 1900s. So if you have a building in your downtown that was built in the late 1800s, chances are it's going to have cast iron. And what makes cast iron so bad, and you'll see this, is that it's not so much, some people say, well, it's brittle, or if you apply water to it, it shatters. No, it doesn't have the same kind of shear strength. So it's very good in compression, but any kind of shifting will cause that cast iron to move. And that is the true thing with cast iron. Plus one other thing that I'll show you here in right there is how thin it could be. This is from, I believe, Lex Shady, who had sent this or put this up about how thin cast iron is. So I want to thank her for this. But you can see how thin that is. Well, again, in compression, this is good. But because this is so thin, any kind of shear, it could bring down that column. And again, 1790s to 1910, boy, if you got a building that far back, God bless you. But if you have anything around after the Civil War that's still standing, you may have some cast iron. The 25-30 rule. Very simple little thing to always keep in mind. You see a column that's 25 feet. Sorry about that. I got a guy sending me cool fire pictures. 25 feet. So if you look all the way, if you see, you know, you can pretty much, that's a safety thing also. So as you're moving in, or hose lengths or whatever, because they couldn't have these long rafters, they needed to put a column in to support the load. They couldn't just make one giant rafter. This was before the days of trusses. So that is why when you go to Walmart and the truss came into play, is that you could have these wide open spaces. You couldn't do that in the late 1800s or 1900s. They were limited. So they would put a beam in every 25 or 30 feet. So it gives you a good idea at how long or how wide a building is. Give it a shot and see. Grab a tape measure, go out there, look at your columns in these buildings, and measure off and see. It's a good rule of thumb. Are your joists exposed or covered? If they're open, they got very little time. This is basically when you see, and I don't want to get too technical, but this is one little NFPA item that you want to consider and think about, is open joist type 3, 200 and 211. What that is the first number is the hour and fire resistance of the exterior walls. So 2 hours on that masonry. The columns, if they're open, you got nothing. If they're covered, you got an hour. And the same with the interior walls. If they're covered, you got an hour. Most basements, wide open, uncovered. All right, not much time. Inside walls, this is what is going to get us and why we lose blocks. You can go into a house fire and you can pull walls until your heart's content. Open them up, chasing fire. Everybody's excited, working, blah, blah, blah. Okay. You get into your main street and you go, we got to open this wall up. Okay. Give that a couple, I don't care how many giant tires you flip or how strong you might be. In a smoke condition with SCBAs, these are going to wear out crews trying to open up. Very difficult. So you have to remind your crews that they're not opening up drywall that they would have in a normal house fire, or even lath and plaster of a residential dwelling. Hopefully, if you have lath and plaster in these ordinary type 3 buildings, great. But some, you may have this plaster with that mesh. It's going to be difficult. We'll talk about ceilings here in a second. Excuse me. We're going to get into basements, but a lot of buildings, when you see this, drugstores. A lot of drugstores, this building ain't a drugstore. If you still got a drugstore that's been in your downtown for 100 years, I want to meet those owners and know how they've stayed in business. But if you know that a building housed a drugstore, the flooring may be terrazzo. And terrazzo is basically these polished pieces of marble and cement laid over wood. Very common in drugstores. Insulates fire below very well. And we'll talk about an event. Yeah.
Have you looked at those with a thermal imager? Just
Yeah,
solely
you're not
at
going to
the
be
roof?
able to. Forget it.
Is there a reflection?
No, I don't believe there's a reflection,
Okay.
but you will not see anything.
Mm-hmm.
Zero. So if you have a drugstore, and I'm not just, drugstore, churches, but that should raise a flag. Drugstores were very prominent on main streets many moons ago. The flooring hasn't really gone anywhere. So just check that out. Yeah, well, now we have all kinds of products, things that really this building was not meant to house. And so you have to look in your interiors on what you have, what kind of products you have. Ceilings and voids, and we'll talk a little bit more as we move through about the modern fire environment in these. Ceilings and voids. Excellent picture of a building that they were taken down. Shouldn't say excellent, but I was able to get my phone down in there to show a void. This is what bites us on Main Street. If you don't anticipate the voids and what limited staffing you have to get ahead of the fire, you're going to lose it. And this just shows you between floors how much space there really is. Tin ceilings. Another interior item that if any of you have studied for a promotional exam, I've studied for promotional exams I've taken a ton of them. And one of the things it says in a very popular textbook, John Norman's Fire Officer Handbook of Tactics or Avillo's Fireground Strategies, they talk about how to open a tin ceiling. You know what? Good luck. God bless you. In those cities that they worked in and they wrote, you got 30 to 40 to 50 firemen pulling. Don't think that a crew of 3 going in to check for fire is going to be able to pull a tin ceiling. Find another avenue, but you can forget of being effective at pulling a tin ceiling if you don't have the staffing. If you do, hey, go for it. But I don't know, let's say again in Lima, how many firefighters they can get on scene in a downtown building fire within the first half hour. But I don't, in my town, you're not going to get the same as what you would get in FDNY or where Avillo was at in Jersey. So where you see tin ceilings, this was a fire retardant item. So when they put these in, you'll find these a lot in, again, drugstores when they were built or dry cleaners. They were not only aesthetic, but also a fire, I don't want to say retardant, but a fire stop, and very difficult to pull. This building in my town, they went tin ceiling and then another tin ceiling. So they had the original and they decided to put another one underneath it. Forget it. Voids. Voids. Large spaces. We don't have all day to discuss, but one thing I always want you to keep in mind, and I may touch on it, but if I don't, I'm bringing it up now because I don't want you to get hurt. Always think before you pull. And here's why. These spaces are huge, or can be. You can have a lot of carbon monoxide and smoke and heat building up. You start moving tiles without hose lines, it could go boom. Always think before you start pulling. Yes, you have ticks and you might be able to see, but be very gentle. Think before you start moving, because you could have one hell of a rapid fire buildup. Good example of avoid again. If you see any kind of material or furnishings that are covered, a window like this, that's a void. This is all void in my downtown. That fire can travel. If you know it, you might be able to stop it and know how to get ahead of it. Smell of smoke. We hate these calls. You get a call in your downtown or a downtown building for smell of smoke. Be very, very astute in your investigation. Be very precise as best as you can. Be diligent. I'm not saying, because this is how many blocks have burned down. Mrs. Smith lives in an apartment on the 3rd floor above a vacant building, but in a row of buildings built in your downtown. And she calls and says, I smell smoke, but I can't see anything. And it's 3 in the morning, and you're like, ah, shit, we go on this. And you go, and you see Mrs. Smith, and you go, yeah, it smells like a little bit, but we can't find anything. And we checked with our fancy thermal imager, and you're okay, Mrs. Smith. If it gets worse, call us back. Well, as you go return the corners, drive down the block, take a look in the windows, take a look and see. I'm not saying you got to force every door in the block, but take a look, because let's say Mrs. Smith is here. And you got a basement cooking down the block. She'll smell it. She'll see it. And I see it, but she'll smell it because of the voids, maybe poke holes when we talk through basements here in a second. So be diligent, and don't just, this bit us a long time ago in the city of Elyria. But when you have a smell and you're going home, tell your driver, you know what, let's go down the alley. Let's turn around and just take a drive back. Turn on those fancy quartz lights on the side of your pumper and shine up the building. And you might see something. You might pick something up. Potty problems. You got fires in these bathrooms, red flag. Or you're going in to look in these bathrooms. Rotten wood. The chases going to be exposed. You might have large bathtubs from, if these were made as apartments 100 years ago. You might have a lot of old cast iron. A lot of, today buildings are built, apartments are built. Think about how many multi-story buildings you have. They're probably just garden apartments, okay? And everything is stacked, as you may know. Well, that's PVC pipe. They're made with PVC because that way they're not going to rot. They're not going to have a hole in there per se, and you don't have to have as much maintenance. When you build a building in the 1800s, early 1900s, and it's 3 floors, you're going to have cast iron plumbing, and let's say they have a hole in it. So they go in, they patch it, and make more voids. Just something to think about. Be cautious when you're working in the potties. Don't stack 100 people in a bathroom in one of these buildings checking for fire. Basements. If you're still with me, and I hope it's just not me talking, but if you're still with me, basements. Listen, think about this. Again, the Home Depot, the Dollar Store, the Wendy's, the places that are new in your cities or built within the last 40 years probably don't have basements. Your Main Street building has got a basement, okay? There's no doubt about it. That is the true difference between a type 3 and a type 2. If you got a brand new O'Reilly Auto Parts that's a type 2, there is no way in hell it has a basement. None. All the HVAC in for that is going to be on the roof. Well, when these type 3s were built, put everything in the basement. You go to Home Depot, and if they don't have what you have in the shelves that they can get with a forklift or whatever, they got a giant storeroom in the back. The mom and pop hardware store that your parents or grandparents went to, their storage was in the basement. I find a basement location. We're going to burn this building. We're going to talk about size up. But here's a good way to find a basement. Here's the steps going to the second floor. Okay. I've never been in this building. I've never been to Lima. But if you're from Lima, I've given you so much press. I want to come and ride with you. But anyway, there's the steps. Well, just like a residential dwelling, they're going to put the steps to the basement, probably underneath the steps going up. So here's the inside of this bar. I guarantee you that's the basement steps. Look for the steps going up, behind it, steps going down. Now, there's a caveat to that in your main street, and I challenge you to find it. A lot of these main street buildings would have 2 entrances to the basement. May have 2 entrances to the basement. If you have an alley off the back of your main street on the seaside, you may have basement access from that seaside area. And you may also have access here. Oh, not always. Something to think about. A lot of issues with these 2 access points. Something to think about. All right. Another good example. This is that wig shop I talked to you about in my downtown. Front door going up. Look at that. They got that thing covered. So those are the steps going up. They got their basement covered. You'll never find that in a smoke condition. Now, they do have a seaside basement, so they do have 2 ways. Well, one is if you get firemen caught in that basement, or they're coming up, out. These are things you have to know. You're not going, the recon in these, you got to do. If you're a firefighter watching this, worth your salt, and you're not getting into your downtown buildings, choose another line of work. Because these are the buildings that are going to hurt you. These are the buildings that you're going to burn down. These are those fires where all eyes are going to be on you from every standpoint and every oath that you took, life and property. If you don't understand these, you could blow both of your oaths. A lot of these downtown buildings will go underneath the sidewalk. So in my town, we have a lot of here they tore this down earlier this month. I was able to get in there, and this is coming in from the basement, but you got a whole room here. So if you look in your downtowns, you start walking towards the A side, you may find a door or doorway that's getting out underneath the street. Just something else to look. Okay. Another item that will help you vent and get water. It's called a showroom bump out. These buildings were built as a store, okay, mercantile. Every Christmas, there's that movie, Red Ryder BB Gun, The Christmas Story. They all got their faces pressed against the showroom window. Okay, when they built these, the showrooms were built not for weight of people, but for maybe a mannequin or clothing or what they sold. Flimsy wood, like a stage. You might have very good access directly into your basement to showroom bump out. So you would be able to take these windows and possibly, the only way you'll know is getting inside and getting down into these buildings. But if you go down and get into these buildings and you walk towards the A side, look up. And if you see a change in grade in that floor to where it's flat and then it maybe goes up a little bit, the showroom bump out. That's easy access it's flimsy because it wasn't designed for people to walk on. You might have good access. Showroom bump out. Basements, access between two buildings. A lot of times you'll have one landlord buy up two buildings, take out a section so he has access. What do you think fire and smoke's going to do? Same thing. It is very common in downtown buildings, downtown areas where they're all conjoined to knock out walls and have one big common basement between two buildings. Well, you go to Home Depot, they got a forklift, okay? But when they stored items in the basements of these downtown buildings, a conveyor belt. Well, if you're not aware that they're there, in a smoke-filled condition, this is taking up half your space. Not only that, it's a safety issue going down, but you're not moving that, and you're not going to get a lot of people up and down, egress issues. You're not going to see that in your modern buildings. Man, I don't care if you don't listen to a damn thing I'm saying either. I want you all to do yourself and the fire service a favor and study what took place on October 17th, 1966. Before 9/11, this was the largest loss of life in the New York City Fire Department. Was in a basement fire in an ordinary type 3 building. You say, well, that was 1966. Many of us that are tuned in tonight weren't even alive, okay? But the lessons here still hold true, and we'll touch on a few of those. He's going to talk about this a little bit here.
On October 17, 1966, the New York City Fire Department responded to a report of a fire at 7 East 22nd Street in Manhattan. The fire resulted in the deaths of 12 firefighters, the largest number in a single incident up to that time. The 12 men died as a result of a collapse of the first floor into an advanced cellar fire. This infamous event is simply known as the 23rd Street Fire.
I often wonder, what if those orders were reversed? If Riley said 33, get in there, and 18 engine, go to exposure 2. My name is Vincent Dunn. I was in the New York City Fire Service for 42 years. I was in 33 engine the night of the 23rd Street collapse. We were first due on the second alarm. At the time, there was heavy fire coming out from underneath the stoop of this brownstone. And Rescue 1 was trying to advance a hose line down there, and they were not making any headway. Chief Goebbels told me to take my men and report around to Chief Riley on 23rd Street. He said, we think these buildings are connected. I reported to Chief Riley. He said, stand fast, 33 engine. While we're there waiting for orders, a fire patrolman, an elderly fire patrolman comes out. And he reports to Riley, and he says, Chief, we got smoke coming up around the baseboards in the back of the drugstore. So Riley turns to 18 engine and says, Lieutenant, get a hose line in the drugstore. He tells me, 33 engine, you get a line into exposure 2. So I remember looking in the drugstore. The light was lit. It was a very light wisp of smoke. And I knew there was heavy fire on 22nd Street. So I was eager to get closer to the fire. And I remember saying to one of the firefighters, there's no fire here. Let's get around to where the fire was. We went around, we stretched a 2.5-inch line. I was working with Chief White, and he's telling us, 33, get this line up to the second floor. There's a bathroom window we can take out and hit the fire. And I remember looking out that window. We didn't open it yet. We're waiting for water. And I think I heard a whoosh. I think I saw a flash outside the window. It was not a clear window. And then we got a call to get out of the building. And I'm reassigned around to 23rd Street. Now, I don't know anybody is missing, but I do remember being in that store with a hose line. Smoke was there. And I do remember parts of that terrazzo floor in the exposed store dropping down, like, you know, chunks of it going down like an earthquake. It reminded me of an earthquake. And you look down there and you see water is 2 feet below the floor, so it's 8 feet of water. So I remember a couple of times there was no softness of the floor, but the terrazzo, I guess all the beams were burned away, and the terrazzo was chunking off, like areas 2 or 4 feet in diameter, were just falling down there. So we backed out, and a chief comes up to me and said, did anybody see Chief Riley? I said, yeah, I reported to him. He said, what time? I said, well, it must have been about 10 o'clock. And he just walked away. And it wasn't until, 1 or 2 o'clock we realized how many firefighters were missing. What happened was the man who owned the building on 22nd Street was an art dealer. He had drums of lacquer and thinner down in the basement. Business was very good. So they knocked down the original bearing wall that was in the middle between the 2 buildings, and they extended a new brick cinder block bearing wall 35 feet into the cellar of the building on 23rd Street. So now the fire occurred down there, and it destroyed the wooden beams of the building on 23rd Street. Now, when Chief Riley and Jack Finley and Joe Priori and 18 Engine and 7 Truck went in to check the smoke around the baseboard that the fire patrolman told them about. They actually went in past the new dividing cinder block wall and were now standing on a terrazzo floor that was directly over the basement of the building on 22nd Street, and it suddenly collapsed. Terrazzo is polished marble chips set in the floor. So you had 5 inches of concrete, and what the 5 inches of concrete and terrazzo floor did, it concealed the weakness of the floor, and it insulated the heat of that fire. So they could not sense the heat of the fire through the 5 inches of concrete. They could not sense the weakness of the burned away wooden floor beams. And when I saw the terrazzo floor collapse, which is very unusual, it was a chunk of floor, it just goes into the basement, crushed those drums of varnish and lacquer, and created a flammable gas ball of fire that roared out through the Wonder Drugstore. Well, first of all, you had so much water. We had the super pump operating, and we had even 2.5-inch hose lines for hours. So those basements were filled with water. When you go through one building, it's at least 8 to 12 inches of brick. Then you got to go through the foundation wall of the adjoining building, 8 to 12 inches of brick. So, they would hoist up the jackhammer to try to take it off. You'd have to jackhammer your way through some bricks, and then they'd come in with the battering ram, and they would knock out, try to expand the hole. And it was a labor-intensive, long period of time. And then, I was not down there, but when they got through that opening, they had to go in and find those bodies, what was left of them.
All right, we're going to move from basements. One more thing about basements that I want to talk to you about real quick. That's a safety item. Regardless, when you go to a basement fire in a residential dwelling, and again, it's all about construction and everything, but one thing in a commercial building, even on a smell of smoke or anything, anytime you send people down into the basement, leave somebody at the top of the steps. Leave somebody at the top of the steps. One of the things that Vinny Dunn talks about in his story of You know, the 23rd Street fire really saved so many firefighters' lives because it's what led Vinny Dunn, that gentleman you started talking, to write all his books and to write all his magazine articles and to be the icon that he is. It drove him because they just did not understand how they could lose so many firemen. One of the things that he talks about in that 23rd Street fire was there was an officer who had left, and back then, here's the thing, all of us have radios now. Everybody goes downstairs. Everybody goes downstairs. Okay, because it's safe, you know, safety while everybody's got a radio. Well, back then, they didn't have radios. And so they would leave a guy at the top of the steps. And in the drugstore, this was the drugstore stairs, the officer, he had a great name. His name was Royal Fox. He left a member at the top of the steps. When the back of the drugstore started to collapse, he started yelling for the crew to get out, get out, get out, get out. They would have lost, there was an engine and a ladder down there. They had about 12 people. If he wouldn't have yelled for them, and if he wouldn't have stayed at the top of the stairs, they would have been trapped and wouldn't have been able to get out. They barely got out, but they got out. That lesson of over 54 years ago still stands true today. You go in a commercial basement, even on a smell of smoke, leave somebody at the top of the steps. I learned it from this event, and I will always leave somebody at the top of the steps, or now that I'm a chief, I will say, make sure you keep somebody at the top of the steps, especially in a commercial building. Cocklofts. This space, it's going to be a lot larger than an attic, okay? And in these type 3 buildings, they were made for a lot of the insulation, to insulate the building. This was before pink insulation and all that. They needed a place for the heat to go and to build up and then dissipate. But these cocklofts can be very, very large. Plus another thing, if you see here, you will see in this cockloft in my downtown here, obviously they built this building first, but you see that these are on an angle. The roof slopes on an angle. This is the A side, this is the C side, and this goes on an angle. For water runoff, well, why is that important? Here's another little key to think about. A fire in the rear is always going to be worse off than a fire in the front, because a fire in the rear has got a lot more cockloft space to get air and to move. So if you have a fire in the rear and it's extending up, that's a bad thing. Whereas if it's in the front, it doesn't have as much room, okay? But it's got all this room and air because of the slope. So always think of that. Just something else to think about. Vents. Another building in my downtown. Cocklofts will have these vents. Excellent, excellent places to get streams in. Excellent. Main Street roofs, shafts and atriums. Remember what I said earlier, incandescent lighting was all they had. No fluorescent lights. These buildings were all attached. So they needed to get light into the building. A lot of times you'll have a shaft above a stairway because the people needed to be able to see walking up and down the stairs, and then also against the wall of an adjacent building. All right. We don't have a lot of time to go into this, but this was a mutual aid fire in the town of Lorain, next door to me in Lorain County. And they had heavy smoke condition. The fire, this was a 3-story ordinary constructed building, empty second floor, empty third floor. And the first floor was a flop house. And they had like individual little rooms and then a common area. Fire started in this common area. This is the A side door. But this you think, well, fire's already through the roof. No, the shaft in the atrium was doing what it was supposed to do, because you don't see any problems here and here. That fire was going right up. What this fire taught me is always get a roof report. Now, I'm a fan of roof reports on any kind of commercial building, even on a type 2. Yes, I know they'll collapse, but I have an aerial with a bucket on it, and I can get recon. I can get an officer in that bucket and give me a shot of that roof. Tell me what's going on. These downtown buildings, these roofs are substantial. Now, if you want to get in by somebody in a bucket to look, great, but you can get people on this roof to give you a roof report. Is the fire coming through the roof, or is it coming out shafts like it's supposed to? Get a roof report. Tar cake, anyone? Just like your roofs. You put a new roof on your house every 30 years, okay? These buildings are 100, let's say it's 120 years old. All right, so if they do like they're supposed to, you're gonna have 4 layers of tar. Can your saw get through that effectively? These are the roofs that you may have to vent to succeed, okay? Now, we don't vent too many roofs, okay? This isn't, Ohio isn't like, big cities like Cleveland or Toledo. I'm sure they got the staffing to get up there and open roofs. We don't open too many residential roofs in my town. We just don't have the staffing. But a commercial roof, this is when things go south for departments like ours that are smaller. You need to get crews up on the roof, not only for recon, but to possibly open and vent that roof. 2 saws are going to be a must. Can they do it with that tar cake? You're going to have that cake. Well, you need 2 saws. All right, these are going to bind up. We had the ability to practice on a vacant one day, and these are going to bind up. So if you're called mutual aid to another city and they say, get up there and cut a hole in the roof, bring 2 saws. Most aerials today, most truck companies, or even if you don't have a truck company, a lot of fire departments carry 2 and you don't forget about a chainsaw. If you're, no. If you have 2 K12 cutoff saws on your rig, and many keep one for forcible entry and one with a carbide, for wood cutting, make sure you have extra carbides and you can change that blade on that forcible entry and bring both saws to the roof. Are you trained well enough to be able to change the blades quickly to where you have 2 good K12s on the roof? You're going to run into problems. Now, I'm not saying it can't be done, but we have 3 people. If you think a crew of 3 is going to handle it on your main street, you're wrong. You need a couple crews up there, okay? You need to be able to take other things that are up there first, other vents. But the only way you're going to know that is to recon ahead of time, to know your buildings. The scuttle knockout. A lot of these buildings, like we said, have that skylight. Well, they're also going to have a return or area that's going to be plastered off. That's going to be the cock loft, okay? If you have a fire in the cock loft and you go up under that roof and you want to vent that cock loft, once you open that skylight, you're not done. You need to take this right here, all right? Or if you just have a second floor fire and you don't want it to get in the cock loft and you just want to vent that mattress fire or whatever, you want to make sure that you don't bring anything into the cock loft by taking these. So you have to decide why you're taking these knockouts or why you want to open not just the scuttle, but then the area getting into the cock loft. You have to decide if you want to take it or not. But if you want to vent a cock loft, you got to take it. Many a downtown building, I would venture to guess, burned down and blocks have burned down because crews have gone up. They've opened up this scuttle and going, we're done. We got nothing coming out. Well, you got to take these if you're going to vent the cock loft. Another good spot right there. That's the cock loft. You want to vent that cock loft, you take that, you got to open this up. A lot of young firefighters don't know that. Rain roofs, very common. The only way you're going to know is when they're putting them on. These are how big they can be. This is the original bowstring, and then they put a truss roof over top. I add this because renovations, anytime you see a dumpster in your downtown, stop. Stop, stop, stop. If you have a chief or a boss, and I can speak freely, and I'm going to, if you have a chief or a boss, or you are a chief and a boss and you're watching this, and you're going, oh, I don't want you guys going into these stores and bothering these because I don't get a call from the mayor. Bullshit. You go into these stores or these buildings and you say, hi, I'm from the fire department. We're not here inspecting. We just want to walk through. And walk through these buildings. All right? Or when you see renovations going on, stop. It's our own laziness and complacency that hurt us. And you have to, in these buildings, understand the renovations. The 23rd Street collapse is a perfect example. Wall bumps. New York City lost 6 firemen, and that was 12 years after the 23rd Street. Renovations. Size up in command. We're going to talk a little bit. All right. So here we have a type 3. All right. I'm going to play this out, and I want you all, Jordan, I hope it's just not me and you watching.
No.
Okay. Okay. But when we're going to play this, and I want you to look at all the things and try to size this up, and then I'll talk about it rather than, going through everybody. But I'm going to play this, and this is in downtown Lima. And from all the things we talked about, try to pick out any of the hazards. And then I'll have Jordan try to possibly guess where the fire might possibly be. All right, so there's the B. We'll go back to the A here in a second. All right. What were some of the hazards that you see here as we're sizing up this building? Okay, so some of the things here, okay, we got this sign, sure, all right. But our windows are all boarded up. That's a hazard that we got to alleviate. Could we have people living up there? Jordan told me about this building and some of the issues. I guess this is a bar upstairs anyway. But if you knew this wasn't a bar, could you have people flopping up there? Little things like that. We have a parapet wall.
Hey, Chief.
Yeah.
I've got a couple Lima guys actually texted me, and they're telling me some things about the interior.
Go ahead, talk away.
So Brad Miller, he texted me, says he's not tech savvy, so he's blowing my phone up, which is fine. He said years ago there was an upstairs downstairs bar, and that they had sprayed foam all over the walls for the bands for the insulation.
Wow.
And that there was a a dance floor. And Brad, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a dance floor upstairs as well. And then he also said that there was an interior central stairway that led to the upstairs. So definitely that chimney fire travel from first floor, basement, first floor up to the second story.
So everybody that's watching this, a couple things here and why these simulations are so good. Now here, this is cool because I'm sitting in my basement in Elyria, Ohio, and I'm playing this, and guys in Lima and all over, wherever they're from in your area, we're all learning. And they're talking about this building. This is what this does, size ups and simulation exercises do. It gets people talking. Do your buildings. Use your buildings. And here, because if I was a Lima firefighter and I was a brand new guy, I don't think they took that insulation or that foam off of these walls. So let's say 10 years from now, when I'm enjoying my pension and Lima guys are enjoying their pension, and there's a new Lima firefighter, if he didn't know that there was that styrofoam or that cork or whatever the hell it is up there, someday they might go up there searching in a heat smoke condition and it just gets to the right temperature. Maybe they take this window out and it heats up and it lights off and hurts somebody. This is what it's all about. This is what it's all about. And this is what I challenge everybody watching this to do and to use this simulation. We could talk about this simulation all day long, okay? But this is just one example of quickly sizing up a building in your town when you have a fire. You don't have signs like this on your regular, normal type 2 buildings that have been built in the last couple of years. Other things. All right, so you can talk, occupancy and life hazard there. Water supply. Here's another thing with water supply. These are old areas, okay? So let's back up. Occupancy and life hazard, and we're almost done here. So I promise to get everybody out of here. But occupancy and life hazard, the only way you're going to know is to be able to get in. What is the occupancy of these buildings now? What is the life hazard? Again, Lima Fire, I did a article that will be coming out soon on Firefighter Nation about how well, when we talk about command and control, how well the fire department handled the fire they had recently in their downtown. And we'll get into that here in a second. But occupancy and life hazard, vacant, okay? Well, do you have vagrants in there? Okay. You got to search. Well, you have to know about that building to get up there. Water supply. These are old areas. All right. If you think that you're going to fight a downtown fire with one hydrant that is like maybe 750 GPM, you're nuts. You're going to burn the block down. If you're putting aerials up, here's the other thing. You have a hydrant here. You have a hydrant here. You have a hydrant here. And you have a downtown Main Street fire, and you put an engine here, a mutual aid, tie into that, and lay into the ladder here. They're all going to be robbing each other. Do you have a plan? If you have a fire and you're a commander worth your salt, you'll bring water in from other streets that you have in other mains. Or in my town, we have hydrants, but we're lucky in our county, we have a water shuttle because we have a lot of rural areas where the part-time and the volunteer departments have tankers, and they have got water shuttle down to a science. And so why not use them? If you're flowing, everybody's got these fancy buckets with twin guns, okay? So let's say you can flow 1,000 gallons out of the fog, and let's say you just keep the top tip on and you can flow, let's say 1,500 gallons per minute, let's say, out of those two twin guns, all right? Where the hell are you gonna get that water? You're not gonna get it from one hydrant. You have to have a plan, all right? Ability to get additional command help to the scene, to the scene. We'll talk about that in the next slide. Training, we don't have enough time in the day. But it's all about, use this as a basis to see where you need your training. Building construction and fire spread. Apparatus placement. We didn't even touch on that. But how are you going to spot your apparatus? One quick thing. When we have a residential house fire, where do we always put the aerial or a truck? Right in front of the house, okay? Well, on your main street or any kind of commercial building, you may want to put that 2 buildings down to cut off fire. Or, you know, flanking. A word about flanking, and I'll clear this out. Very important. If you have a building, commercial building, and you're worried, and Lima did a very good job of this, and I touched on it in the article, but if you have any kind of commercial building or a church or any kind of collapse problem or issue, first off, you have to anticipate that when you arrive. So you're not going to put big red that the city spent $1 million on in front, okay? But once you spot that truck, you ain't moving it. When you have commercial buildings, and again, this is training and talking, put it, flank it, corners. If you, or, you know, if you have a vacant lot, you know, we have to think about our collapse zones. We forget about these things because we go to 10 million house fires that don't collapse on our apparatus. You want to study and learn and use an example about collapse and have a training with your people? Kansas City, Missouri, 2015. Research the double LODD. Google that. Kansas City, double LODD 2015. Just put that in. If you can't find it, you email me and I'll send you it. But that had a lot to do with collapse zones, lack thereof, setup, and sector officers. But think about it. You got to flank. Use of modern technology, drones. Every police department now has fancy drones. Do you have a drone? Do you have capability to get a drone? Do you have some nerd that has a drone? You know what? Get in touch with that person. Our police department has 2 drones that are fantastic. And we have to utilize, there is no doubt in my mind, if I get a major fire, you know, we've used them for some lost persons. They just got them within the last year. Any kind of drownings in a pond or lake, commercial fires, house fires, even good working house fires. The cops love to play with these things. Have some sort of agreement and find out how you can get them. If they don't have them, find somebody in your community. A lot of media outlets, newspapers have them, whatever. Find somebody with a drone and say, hey, listen, if we have a fire, can we utilize your drone? I'll tell you what, there's nothing, I think that's going to be what every commander in the future is going to end up having, is that, and I'll show you an example of where how that worked here in a little bit. Occupancy and life hazard. Back to that. You know, what do you have? This is a college town. Ohio University is in Athens, Ohio. They had a major downtown fire. And you see this square, because that college town, they smash kids everywhere. You see that dormer right there? Well, that's this room here. This was a room that they had rented out to college kids or whatever. So you got to figure those things out based on your downtown. One more thing, very important, very, very important on this. Okay. Modern furnishings in a legacy world. What do you have inside? More importantly, do you see this? Go into your downtowns and you will see asbestos ceiling tiles. Okay. Most buildings built in the 50s or prior to the 50s or whatever, when they were renovated in the 50s and 60s, I should say, this tile was the precursor to the drop ceiling you have today. All right. This ceiling tile is just glued up to the underside and it's like gasoline. They don't make this anymore. Okay. But it's there. When you go through your buildings, your downtown buildings, your legacy buildings, this is an apartment building in my town that was built in 1920. We have any kind of fire that comes out of this room. These doors are not self-closing. it's going to light this hallway off. What do you have in your buildings? You look at that kind of acoustic tile, old acoustic tile, cellulose type of tile. That's bad stuff. That's very common in these legacy buildings, especially ones that have been rehabbed 50, 60 years ago. We talked about supply, command help, lots of eyes, lots of eyes. Here's one thing I want to caution you on though, okay? A lieutenant on most fire departments is in charge of 3 people, and he basically do reports and toilet paper in the firehouse, that kind of stuff. If you put that lieutenant or company officer in charge of a sector, and you say, okay, lieutenant of engine 4, you have the B side. But that lieutenant of engine 4, day in and day out, is used to talking with 3 people. Now he's got maybe 2 mutual aid engines and maybe a truck. He's got maybe 6 or 7 people. He's used to supervising 3 and looking at a very narrow picture. When you set up sectors, you got to make sure, and this is training, if you don't have chief officer help and you're going to use lieutenants or company officers, or you are a company officer, and let's say you come in on mutual aid and you're thrown to the wolves and said, you're the D side or you're the Bravo, lieutenant. First thing you need to say to yourself is take a deep breath and think 2 words: big picture. You have to think like a chief. This is why I would prefer trying to get chief officers as sector officers, because they're used to standing in front or used to looking at the big picture. So if you have command level people, whatever their rank, put them in sectors if you can. If you can't, and you know that ahead of time that you can't get chief officers to set up in sectors, then you got to tell your people, if I put you in charge of a sector, this isn't some classroom where we're sitting in blue card. This is the real deal. And you might have anywhere from 10 to 12 people to supervise. You need to take a step back, know where your 2 people are at, but then also remember that you gotta watch those 15 people. And why is that? Here's a good example. You have an old salty member that wants to go pick up an 1 3/4 line and wants to spray some water in a window. And you're a lieutenant. And you see this person and you go, hey man, why don't you stop? Or don't do that. Could they listen to you? I hope so. But they might go, who the hell are you? Well, if you see a white hat and you go, hey pal, get off. No, you're just more used to being a jerk. Okay? That's it. And telling people what not to do. If you're going to have company officers in the sector role, they got to learn to be that jerk. This is the fire that Lima had. And when we talk about collapse zones, I brought this up now. Again, this is part of, again, I don't want to get in too much into this, but here you have this alley right here. You have to be very cautious, and the boss that ran that fire did a very good job. Part of the article, I have the audio, and they talk about collapse zones. Again, when was the last time you went to a house fire and command goes, we're going to set up collapse zones? That's a hell of a house fire, okay? We just don't do that. So when you have commercial building fires, you got to announce collapse zones. You have to set up collapse zones. You have to flank the corners. But if you have an alley, you can't allow people to go up and down these alleys. That's what happened in Kansas City. They killed those 2 and injured 16 more firemen. But you got to watch those alleys, because these people have nowhere to run if they got to get out of that collapse. Modern technology, the use of drones. This was a fire that took place in Leipzig, Ohio, which is I can't think of the county that it is in, but it is up.
It's in Putnam County.
Putnam County, thank you. Northwest Ohio, Putnam County. They had a fire where they launched a drone. And this drone, like most police drones have, infrared. Maybe that's one disadvantage if you find that person with a drone, or you just go buy that drone from a store or whatever. Police drones are going to have that infrared. And they launched this thing, and you can see the hot spots and the real-time pictures. Very valuable. Use drones if you got them. Rick,
Hey,
thoughts?
Chief.
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt. There was a
No,
question.
you're fine.
And it was, do you utilize, or what are your thoughts on utilizing mutual aid chief officers for those sector roles?
I'll write it down. Love it. And here's why. But here's the problem. My department doesn't do it because it sucks. Not that it sucks utilizing them. It's that we can't figure out how to do it. We're stuck in this, we're just not good. We, in Lorain County, we have 2 on-duty command officers that have their own vehicles 24/7. City of Elyria, City of Lorain. It's impossible for the Lorain shift commander to come into Elyria, and I would have to get the okay from 1 million people to leave my jurisdiction. And it's getting better, I hope. But anyway, that's one example of that's not good. Find out in your community if you can do that, if you can bring command level officers in to develop your boxes to where you're bringing chief officers in. If you are a fire chief and you're watching this, make friends with your other chiefs. It is very good east of me in Lorain, in Cuyahoga County, Lake County, the counties that are around me that I know are very proactive at this now. If your county that you're in isn't, and you have any kind of say, or you have any kind of ability to try to find out or work on it, do it. We suck at it in Lorain County, and I wish we could fix that. I wish we could fix that. I don't think we'll fix it before I retire. Some of the parts of our county is very good, but where I am at, it's no good. And I have trouble getting command level officers, chief officers to my fires. It takes too long, and it sucks. So if you, my advice to you is yes, 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 yes. Find out to do it. Write them in your boxes and do it.
We're
I'm sorry, you got something else?
Yeah, it's funny because we've started the conversation.
Okay.
And we're getting a new CAD program in our dispatch in Allen County.
Okay.
And we're building the boxes and all that stuff. So our mutual aid is improving, and relationships have improved. So I think, kind of like you said, in a couple of years it might be a thing, but a lot of us are talking, so that's always a positive.
That is a positive thing. Yeah, you have to set up sectors. If you're a department that may not be able to, for example, in that fire in Lima, Captain Miller had company officers, I believe, but he announced and said, hey, you're this, you're that, you're this, your sector, your sector, your sector. Okay, that's good. What that fire taught me is, and every fire is a learning one, is that I got to have my people know that if I put them in a sector, what that truly means they need to be in charge of. And that it brought, it's a learning thing. So if you're going to do that, make sure your people that when they are assigned that, they know that responsibility, because again, day in and day out, they're not used to doing that. Finally, and we're almost to the 2-hour mark, and I apologize, and those that are stuck around, I thank you. Main Street RIT thoughts. These are big buildings. Couple things. You're going to need at least two teams. One on the A, one on the C. Okay? And I would have if you have command officers coming in, have a command officer in charge of RIT. You're going to be going in different buildings. Okay. You got to set up big RIT. It's a big RIT operation if you need it. So that might be an alarm in itself. Do you have the personnel? You know, if you're going in these buildings, if you've written off this building, but you got people in this building and that building, you need to have a RIT on this side and on that side. Because what are they going to run around the block? No way. So that's very important. Does RIT have their own water supply? Okay. Do they have the ability to get their own water, their own lines? You know, it might be the only thing that keeps somebody that's buried or in a collapse or has just gone down or lost. Let's say this building here, and this happened in Illyria, we lost a group of downtown buildings, and the building, the Delta, flashed, and there was 10 guys inside of this building, and it went, I'll never forget, I'm watching this, and it's zero visibility, and it kept getting worse. I should say it went from not so bad to you saw the black, and all of a sudden the second floor lit off, and these guys all come tumbling out. Very lucky. Well, if you had to go to work, you know what? The only thing that might save them is water. So, you know, something to think about. RIT thoughts. There's a lot of other things that you consider, but those are some big ones. You're going to need multiple ones. My email, if anybody needs anything, I'll write it down. I want to thank you all for sticking with me. If there's something I can do to help you, my email is efdchief3@outlook.com. If I can help you in any way, if you want information on something, you shoot me an email and I'll help you out. If you want something on a particular line of duty death, send me that information. And I have a very large cloud library of LODDs with reviews, audio, tons of stuff on this main street, lots and lots of stuff, all to help you guys. So if I can help you in any way, there's my email. Just remember this final thing in the type 3. It's not what you see so much as what's going to be. What's going to happen in 5 minutes, 3 minutes, you know, where that fire is going to be. We fail at that and you're going to lose a block. That's all I got.
Chief, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I thank you for becoming a mentor for me. I always pick something up new, listen to you talk. I did get an email. The program that Chief Pronesti is using for the simulations is called SimuShare. It's like $75 or something like that a year. Very easy to use. Go out with your iPad, your cell phone, take pictures, and you can burn your buildings down. I think it helps scene size ups. You know,
without a doubt.
Especially if you have the younger members who they might find themselves in that weird spot where they're the first due medic. Get that rundown going. Get that information broadcast out. So that really helps with it.
Yeah, and if somebody wants to, we can do something like this. One of the things that I do is one of the classes is if a department's interested, you send me pictures of your buildings and give me a little bit of information on them and address and 4 sides, and I can put them in that simulator and we can do a size up class. And it helps size up. It helps with reading smoke. SimuShare is a good program, but don't get discouraged by it. You have to work with it for a little bit, but there's some tricks and I can help you out with that. Or if a department wants to have me, you know, just shoot me an email, and if you're looking for something, maybe we can set something up. But yeah, it's called SIMS-U, the letter U, -share.
And please remember, if you streamed this to your firehouse, your shift, it was your training night, be fair. Don't take advantage of me, but send me your roster of the guys and gals that were there, and I'll issue the certificates for that. And do the link that's in the chats. for a course eval. It just helps make these things better for instructors as well. And then Chief, thanks again. I'm gonna get you. I promise I'm gonna get you something to you.
Okay.
For your time.
No problem. It's my pleasure.
Been
I
very
enjoy it.
busy.
No, I appreciate it. If I can help anybody, there's my email. But
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Yep, you too.
Bye-bye.
Any questions from anybody else on here? Nope. All right, cool. Well, we're going to end the night. I'll work on those CEs. Give me a couple of days, and I'll get them emailed out to you. If you have any ideas for future webinars or topics, please email them out to me or shoot me a text or whatever, and we'll get something lined up. So thanks again for your night, guys.